Hello, biologists. I want to talk about reading our textbook. So here's our giant big textbook, and there's some strategies that might help you have a better time reading it. But before we talk about those, I want to talk about why reading is so important, and not just because reading is important, you know that, but there's a lot that goes on when you read that you maybe not have thought about before. And so there's 4 main components to reading that are really important, especially in science education. And so the first one is building content knowledge, right? We want to be learning new facts, we want to be getting new vocab words, becoming comfortable with material. It's really important that we build new connections in our neurons. Every time you learn something, you literally rework the neurons in your head. So building content knowledge is really important in class. We want to gain knowledge during this class. But we also have to think about cognition. So cognition is the second reason. Cognition is thinking about things, not just learning new things. So I could learn a vocab word, but if I don't know how to apply it, I don't really have any cognitional skills to work with. So thinking about the big picture, asking questions, coming up with connections, problem solving, that's cognition. So we want to gain information, we want to be able to use it. And then if we use it, we have to be talking to somebody, right? Like, we're not going to use it by ourselves ever. We're going to use it in life, something. So that's the third thing that happens when you read, is there's a social aspect. We communicate with each other through written words and by reading those words. And so reading is inherently social. It connects us to each other. It's how you learn new perspectives. It's how you gain different ideas that you may not have had before. They're somebody else's ideas. And so that's important. And in biology specifically, we network. We have to network. We don't do biology in isolation. And so the social part of reading is really important. But you can't have social without personal. So that's the fourth thing, is reading is really personal. And if it's something that you struggle with, like this is a dense, big book, if it's hard, if it's frustrating, if you don't think it's fun, then it's hard to be confident in your identity as a reader. So that's a personal aspect of reading, is how you feel about your own skills, but also your fluency and your stamina and your persistence. So if this isn't something that you like, you might not try as hard because it's hard, right? So learning to keep going, keep working on it, practicing, setting realistic goals so you don't feel bad about it, that's all really important to reading as well. So even though it feels like you're just reading this so you can answer questions about it, you're reading this so that you can apply it to your own life, apply it to other people's life, communicate about the information you learn information that's the knowledge building, and think about what you learned in new context, that's the cognitive skills. So now that we know why reading is such a big topic, let's talk about some tips on how to get into this thing. Okay, so let's talk about reading tips. The first thing that I think is really important to think about when you think about reading is that you're probably going to have to read it more than once. And I know that might not be what you want to hear, but really it's important. And it doesn't mean you have to read every single word more than once, but you're going to try and get the content that you're reading more than once. And I like to start by previewing what I'm going to read. So I preview the information. And by that, I mean, I open the book, I look at the outline of the chapter, I look at the bold words, so outline, bold words. I look for figures, that's super important. That's going to be graphs and like pictures, images, especially in biology textbooks. Those really are telling you what's going on. I try and figure out what topics are coming up so I can identify where to put it in my brain. I count this as the first read through. Even though I'm not reading every word, I'm opening the textbook, I'm flipping through the pages, I'm looking at what's about to come up, and then I use my next technique, which is anticipation. I anticipate what's next. So if I'm going through the outline and it's talking about different adaptations to hot climates, I could, in my head, start guessing, well, maybe it's going to talk about cold climates next, or maybe it's going to talk about living in dry environments or living in hot and wet environments like the tropics. So I want to see what's coming by previewing it, and I want to start thinking about what may happen next. And the reason you do this is previewing helps you scaffold the information. It helps you think about where it should go and what you already know. Like if I start looking at the outline and I see it's talking about plants, and I know a good amount about plants, it helps me store the information with the other stuff I already know. And then if you anticipate it, you're already working on the cognitive part of reading. You're thinking about what's going to happen and where you can put that connection with all the other information that you're going to learn. So that's the second technique that I like to do. Then I use this thing called talk to the text. That should be a 4, sorry. And it says talk, but they mean like write. So you're going to write in your book, you're going to write in the margins, you're going to write all over the words. When I do this in my textbook, and I'll show you in a minute, I like to underline words that I think are important. I like to circle words I don't understand. I always ask questions. Like if I'm reading my textbook and there's something that I think is incredible, I'll make a note of it and say, how did they figure that out? Or what are the implications there? Or how does that apply to this other situation? So the idea behind talk to the text is you're writing the information that you're learning, or you're writing a connection to it, which is important for helping it stick in your brain, but you're also engaging with the text. It doesn't say talk at the text, it's talk to the text. So you're interacting with it, you're trying to think about what you're learning as you're reading it. So this is a strategy that was created by a program called Reading Apprenticeship, and they have a really cool website you can check out as well. So Reading Apprenticeship is where this one comes from. If you don't like writing things down, which is totally fair, some of us don't, then this next option might be for you. It's think out loud. Think out loud as you read. That means like literally talk out loud. If you read something, say, huh, wow, or okay, I don't know what that word means. Maybe I can finish the sentence and figure it out from context. This might feel a little embarrassing, especially if you're in public, but it's really useful. So what I do is I shut myself in a room and I talk to the text in writing, and then I think out loud as I write. So I do both of these in tandem, and it's worth it. I do think it's important to take a break as you're reading and figure out how you feel about the material while you're going through it. Another technique is called circle maps. These are kind of cool. I'm going to draw one for you. If I'm going to read something about desert plants or my cells making ATP, you just kind of draw a circle. I like to do mine with little arrows. You don't have to do little arrows. And then as you're thinking about the idea, let's say it's cells making energy. Cells make energy. You first put what you know here, so cells, and they make energy, and I know energy is in the form of ATP. And then you read the chapter, and then after you come back and you fill in the information. So maybe when I started, that's all I knew, was cells make ATP. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, ATP is this cool molecule with these 3 phosphates, and now I know the energy is stored here. And I know cells have membranes, and I know the membranes are really important to transport. And where they make the ATP is in the mitochondria. But if I didn't know any of that ahead of time, that means I have all this new information to fill in my circle map after I read. So it kind of goes back to the other two ideas where you're anticipating what you're going to learn, and then you're figuring out where it goes as you're learning it, and then this is just a way to organize it and put it down. So I like circle maps, but I also really like concept maps. That'll be our fourth strategy. Concept maps. Concept maps are really cool. You basically just take vocab words and you connect them to other vocab words, and you explain over the arrow how they're connected. So if I had like cells make energy, the way that they make energy is via respiration. But then I could go in and I can add cells have membranes, and they contain mitochondria, and you just get these giant webs of vocab words. And what I like about concept maps is if you can't connect the how over the arrow, it means you don't really understand it. So if I had a vocab map that was the word adaptation and acclamation, ignore spelling errors, and I didn't know how these two things related, I would know that I need to go back and study the difference between these two and how they're connected. So concept maps are really great for that. And what I like about concept maps is as I'm reading, I'll list the bold words, and then I'll start making a map as I go through and like organize all my vocab as I'm reading it. And then when I'm done, I'll try and make a giant flow chart about everything that I read in the chapter. So that's concept maps. That's a technique for reading. Then, as you're reading, you can also paraphrase. Paraphrase means take what you've learned and reword it in your own words. So if I was talking about cellular respiration again, I could say, oh, the stage that makes the most ATP is oxidative phosphorylation, or I could say the last step makes hella ATP. One of those is going to make more sense to my brain than the other, and that's okay. So that's what your own words are for, is making it make sense to you. Something that's similar but different is to summarize it. That's to take the information and make it concise. I'm going to take an entire paragraph and I'm going to summarize it in 2 to 3 sentences, which is also another way to say that is to shrink the text. Like chapter 39 is several pages long, but if I took the main idea out of every paragraph, I could shrink it down to just a page or two. And then as I'm writing my notes, I could shrink that down maybe even more. So you're trying to make the information more concise to make sense of it a little bit easier. Then I want to put take notes, but I don't want you just to take notes that don't matter to you, so take notes that are important to you. For me, that means bullet points, that means concept maps. For you, it might mean note cards, it could mean making Quizlets, whatever works in your world. But it does help to take notes. If I just read the text and I don't take notes, I'm not going to retain as much as if I do take notes. And if you're not into writing things down, then tell someone what you learn. after you read a chapter, go tell your roommate, go call your mom and tell your mom. If you don't want to talk to other people, that's fine. Tell your cat. My cat knows so much about biology. I mean, she's dumb as a rock otherwise, but she knows a ton of bio because I tell her. I really do. This is all honest. I tell her what I've learned as I'm learning it. So those are a couple techniques that you can try. We've got 11 now, and then I just want to throw a couple ideas out. These are like hacks if you are a dyslexic person like I am. These are some things that I have learned that help me. The first one is to look for patterns. But try not to guess the ending. So when I'm looking at a word that looks similar as another word, like let's say something biological like navel and nasal. Oops. I can't decide whether or not it's an A or not. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so when I'm reading, these two words look really similar to me. So I look for patterns in the shape of the word. This is flat with a little bump. This is flat with a little bump. So I see the shape. I'm looking for patterns as I'm reading, but I can't guess just on the N and the L because then I wouldn't know if it's navel or nasal, and those are in two totally different locations. So look for patterns, but try not to guess what the word is. Another thing that helps is try standing. I know it might sound silly, but if I sit for a long time and try and read, I'll get really sleepy. Getting sleepy is a side effect of reading when the words move around or are fuzzy or kind of like jump back and forth on you. So if I stand, I can read for longer times, and that helps me. Another thing that helps is less stimulus. I can't read and listen to music. I can't read and have the TV on. I can't do anything else except read when I'm reading. And that took me a while because I wanted to be the kind of person that read in coffee shops or that read while listening to an album, and it won't work for me. So I have to be in a quiet room. I'll stand while I'm reading. I look for the patterns, but I try not to guess the ending. And then as you're working, give yourself breaks. Have a snack. Tell yourself that you're gonna read half the chapter and then get yourself some cookies or whatever it is. Breaks and rewards. Reading is a lot of time and effort, and if you can give yourself goals that you can achieve, every time you achieve one of those goals, you feel better about it, you're gaining confidence, you're making this giant task of reading a big book in smaller chunks, and so it's more accessible, it's more manageable. And since it's hard, you do need little breaks. So don't beat yourself over the head with a textbook. Try and make it a friendly experience for yourself. Okay, so now let's try and look at this textbook together. Big old textbook. We are going to start on chapter 39 because that's where we're starting in class. And I'm going to open it up, try and get you to look right at it. Awesome. When I open up the book, is that good? That's good enough. So the first thing I'm going to do is do previewing like we talked about. And in our text, that's really cool because there's this flowchart, totally a concept map, because if you look in your own version, there are connectors right next to the arrows connecting the vocab words. So I know this is concept map, which is really exciting. I wrote concept map there. It's a little hard for you to read. But there's these connectors over the major concepts. And it says at the top, in this chapter, you will learn that. And then it has all these different ideas. So this is like the main goal of the chapter. And I want to read this first because that helps me set up what I need to know. So previewing. It also helps me anticipate what I'm going to be learning. So it says heat exchange and thermoregulation. I can already start thinking about what I know about those words, like before I even start. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at the bold at the top of each section. So in our book, it's purple and it's bolded. This one says form, function, and adaptation. This one says the role of fitness trade-offs. So these are the major topics that we're going to be discussing. So I'm going to go through, check out the bold titles on each of them. Adaptation and acclimatization, that we've already talked about. So this is where I got that concept that we discussed on Monday. Then I have this giant figure here. It's taking up a whole page, which means that it must have been important enough to the publisher that they put a whole page in here. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to read this before I even read the rest of the chapter, because I want to know what's coming. So I'm going to read this, I'm going to look at these titles, I'm going to get a preview. Ooh, we're going to look at muscle, so that's cool, that's good to know. Go through different tissue types, we're going to look at bone. So I'm helping set myself up and scaffold the information. Once I've made it all the way through the chapter, I do it again, and this time I look for bolded words. So they might seem out of context the first time you look at them. Like this says spermatophore. Why are we talking about sperm? Who knows? I won't know until I read this, or until I read this figure, because it's related to this figure. But I'm gonna know to pay attention to this word when I see it for the first time. And since it's bolded, that must mean that it's important. So I've already worked through my chapter twice, and I haven't even really read it. Both of those working throughs, looking at the major titles, checking out the figures, looking at the bolded words, those help me figure out what's coming and how to organize the information in my brain. Then I'll go through, I'll read the definitions of each bold word. I'll kind of like scan the chapter and see if I know what it's talking about. And if I get to something where I get confused, let's say here, metabolic rate. I'm confused by that word because when I hear metabolism, I think about, you can eat a lot, you have a high metabolism, and what does that actually mean in the context of biology? So I'll circle it, I'll write in here, I'll ask myself a question. This is talking to the text, I'm interacting with it, I'm trying to make connections to this and what I've already learned before. And then if I get to something really cool, like, this section here about blood or something, then I'll go and tell my cat about it. So the major goal is to meet those 4 things that happen when we read. We learn things, we think about the things that we learn cognitively, we engage personally and socially with all these ideas, and then I'm going to try and synthesize that information in my notes. And your notes can be concept maps or flowcharts or note cards, whatever it is. But if I actively go through my reading first and set myself up with a preview and with anticipation, and I'm writing in the text and engaging with the text, what I read will make a lot more sense. What we're trying to avoid with these different reading techniques is that feeling where you read the same paragraph over and over and over and you don't understand it. So we've all been there, we've all had that experience. You'll read something and you're like, I have no idea what I just read. If we stop and we slow down and we take breaks and we set realistic goals, we can read a sentence, and if we don't understand it, it's okay. We'll just think about it, we'll work on it, maybe we'll skip it and we'll come back to it. Or if it's really tricky and we just don't get it, we email the instructor and I will talk to you about it. All right, so that was an introduction of why thinking about reading and working on reading textbooks is so important. 11 different techniques to use, not including the bonus hacks that I personally think are really good. And if you have any questions, email me. I'm always around and I'm happy to talk about this stuff. So hopefully try some of those ideas and some of those concepts. And if they work for you, I'll be really excited to hear about it. Have a great day, and I will see you soon.